Okay, hello everyone. This is my presentation for the secondary admissions process for the intake for September 23, and that's a long way away. But also, your child's in year 5 at the moment, and they'll be in year 6 next year to start secondary school in 2023, and the whole process starts now, this side of the summer, with you deciding whether or not you want your child to take the Medway test. The Medway test is in early in the September term. And that, of course, determines which schools you can put on the application form, which then determines which school your child will ultimately get. Okay, I will send out the link to the Medway presentation, which is this one, which is far more comprehensive in terms of detail and questions, but hopefully mine's a bit more succinct and just tells you what you need to know. So by all means, use both. Okay, so let's see where we go with this one. What we're going to cover today, the transfer process, okay, which starts, as I said, this side of the summer with whether or not you register your child for the test and what happens after the summer in terms of choosing schools. The testing and reviewing procedure, so what happens for the tests and what happens if they don't pass and you wish to review or appeal. And of course, choosing schools, which is probably the most important bit. As last year, the whole process is managed online. There's no booklet to be circulated. All the details about schools are online. The forms are online, and I recommend you do everything online because obviously you get email alerts for everything once you're registered. We'll send that link will be live. This will be sent out, this presentation, as a PDF, so you'll be able to click on the links and that'll take you where you need to go. And as I said, the Medway presentation will also be available via a link. Here's the process. Okay. 2 decisions to make. Obviously, if your children are not going to sit the test and you're happy for them to go to, or they're happy, of course, to go to a non-selective school, then it's a shorter process. You just need to worry about getting your form in on the 31st of October. But if you do wish your child to take the test, then the registration opens on the 1st of June via the link previously to Medway Admissions and closes at the end of the month. All right. And then in September, the school applications open at the 9th of September. Your children take the tests if registered on the 13th and 14th. There is some testing on the 15th and 16th, so Thursday and Friday that week, for those children who are deemed eligible to have special arrangements. I'll go through that later. And then the 4th of October, your results are posted or emailed to you if you've registered for email. And then, of course, there's the review process. If your child didn't pass and you wish to go for an academic review, I'll explain about that later. And then those happen pretty quickly afterwards in October, and you'll get the results of those by the 21st of October, which will leave you about 10 days then to know that your child is eligible for a secondary selective school, or not, and that will help you decide which schools you put on the list. But I'd also go through that. Okay. First thing you need to decide by the end of June is to test or not. What we can tell you or recommend, we cannot decide for you whether your child should take the test or not. We can't tell you whether your child will pass or not. We can give some indication as to whether your child may be able to cope in the highly academic environment of a grammar school, but all we can do is look at indicators, their ability in class, what their books are showing, that may suggest they're high ability enough to cope with the demands of the test, and of course life at a selective school where the academic expectations are far higher than a non-selective school, and it can actually be too much for some children. The indicators we look at, your children may have talked about CAT tests. That's a cognitive ability test, and we've just finished those in school. It just gives us a standardized score, very similar to a Medway test score in regards to 100. If a child scores 100 in the CAT test, that means they're pretty much average for their age. Anything above 110, they're of deemed higher ability, and anything below 100, then they're obviously working at below the level expected for their age. That works on a similar level to the actual Medway test scores as well. It's not definitive, but it gives us a clue of whether your children are working at that higher level, which is what they're going to need to pass the Medway test. Their current STEPS levels, and they should consistently be working at S+ by the end of each academic year, which is the greater depth level, if they're going to meet the standard of the test. But again, talk to your class teacher. They will be able to advise you on your children's performance, or whether we think they're suited for a selective school or not, or whether they might be able to pass the test or not. Medway test, Kent test, or both. You should only enter your child for the Kent test if you're intending to apply to a Kent selective school. Some of you live on the border, some of you may even live in Kent. But if you're only going to apply for the Medway schools, then there's no point at all in taking the Kent test, because the Medway schools don't look at it. Likewise, if you're going to a Kent schools or looking for Kent selected schools, and they won't be looking at the Medway test, you'll need to take the Kent test for those schools. There's no advantage in taking both tests for the sake of it or for extra evidence. They really don't take any attention of that whatsoever. The test request form, there are no registration forms, test registration forms being circulated. Everything is online. This is the safest and most secure method. And as I said, you'll register your email and you'll get alerts and an email confirmation that your child has been registered. We do get a list of children before the deadline, so we will chase up those who we think should have perhaps applied after conversations with you and haven't, just to make sure. But otherwise, I'm afraid it is down to you. You can download a PDF paper form, write in it and return it to Gun Wharf, but you need to hand it in to Gun Wharf themselves. It's nothing to do with us, all right? So please don't hand it in at school. Access arrangements, special arrangements. It is possible to apply for special arrangements for some pupils if they have a particular SEN need. This can range from testing in a separate room or having learning breaks or using aids such as a laptop that they would normally use in school, such as a slope board or coloured overlay. In some circumstances, pupils may be eligible for extra time. Any such applications must be based on what support the pupil routinely accesses on a normal day-to-day in school. And if you think your child may qualify for such arrangements, or we think they might, then we'll discuss this with you. The application needs to come from you as the parent, but of course the school will advise you on that. So please speak to your class teacher if you think that might apply to your child. The test is scheduled for the 13th and the 14th of September, Tuesday and Wednesday. However, if your child was granted special arrangements, they will be tested separately on the Thursday or Friday of that week. So they won't take it on the same day as everyone else. So if they're in a separate room or they've got a learning aid or extra time or learning breaks, then they will actually do the test on different days. Parents will be notified whether the test has passed or failed about 2 weeks after the test. Okay. After the test results have come through, there are two options available for parents who have failed if they wish to pursue. If you've passed the test, great. So you can go ahead and start selecting the schools of your choice, including selected schools and non-selected schools if you so desire. I'll go into this later, but you've got up to 6 choices, which I recommend you choose 6 schools, different schools. And if your child has passed the test, and you can put grammars in there and you can put non-grammars in there, it's entirely up to you. However, if your child has failed, you do have the option of an academic review. And this is an academic review, okay? This happens within weeks of the test results being published. And this is solely a review of academic work in the case where the parents, supported by the school, believe that the children's work in books supports a selective place, that the test doesn't reflect your child's ability, okay? You don't have any rights to present evidence, or we don't speak to the schools. It is literally the school books of the child being sent to an independent panel who look at the work in the books and decide whether what they see in the books reflects the work they'd expect of a grammar school child. Okay, I have to be honest, we have reviewed numerous children over the last 3 or 4 years and we've got no one through review. It's a very difficult process to get through. We would actually recommend, if your child doesn't pass the test, that you actually follow the appeals route, which is number 2, and actually miss out the review, because we've had far more success with this. Appeal, this is when you appeal directly to a school that you put on your list, but didn't get a place for. And this occurs after the school places have been allocated in March. All right, so your child hasn't passed the test. However, as long as you've put the school that you wish to appeal to on the list, you can appeal to them. That includes grammar schools. If your child doesn't pass the test and you still want to appeal to a grammar school, then put them on your list of 6. You can only appeal to a school you put on that list. So even if they didn't pass the test and you have every intention of appealing to one of the grammar schools, then stick it on the list. This is an opportunity for parents to appeal directly to a school, so it's got nothing to do with us, apart from we do send a letter of support, but otherwise it is to the school directly for a place in person. So you put the appeal in, you say why you think your child deserves a place there. We'll provide evidence as well as part of that. As I said, it must be, though, to a school that appears on that list of 6. The appeals process does ask whether a review was made early in the year, all right, and they do take into account whether a review was made and wasn't successful. So that will tell them that actually the work in books wasn't up to scratch. So so that's why we actually recommend, if you actually don't do the review, unless there's a really strong compelling evidence that the work in the books will support the review part, we'll probably recommend for most people that you just skip to the appeal. So don't worry about the review, stick a grammar school on the list, even if they didn't pass the test, and then you could appeal directly at the end of the year. Okay, hope that makes sense. Important that parents should decide whether the child should take the test in the best interests of your child. It is important you involve them in any discussion. Taking a test may put unnecessary pressure on a child, especially if they don't have much chance of passing. Whatever school they go to, they'll be studying for the same exams, the same qualifications as everyone else in the grammar school, but will probably get more support. Lots of very successful people have managed in life without attending a grammar or selective school, myself included, if I may just say. So there you go. Also, some children could well pass the test, but struggle in that higher academic environment at secondary school. And again, your class teachers know your children the best in terms of how they perform in school. You know them best as a parent. So between you, discuss what you think is best for the child. I also would shield against parents who say, well, I just want the children to have a go, or their friends are having a go and I'd like them to have a go. Listen to the teachers. If we feel you're putting under unnecessary pressure, they have no chance of really passing, then I would recommend you really don't put them through it. Okay, because it's just it's not worth the pain. Right, after the test, to say this is the important thing, is which school. You have a transfer form which you fill in online, and you list your preferences. Up to 6 schools. It is recommended you list 6 different schools. Please don't stick the same school down 6 times. It makes absolutely no difference. And listing just 1 or 2 really limits opportunities, and you risk being allocated a place at a school you really didn't want. So fill up the 6 preferences for 6 different schools. If you think you're going to appeal for a grammar school, if your child didn't pass it, then make sure it's on the list. List the schools in preference order. So by all means, stick a grammar at the top, even if your child didn't pass the test, but you're going to appeal. Selective or non-selective, you should only list the selective or grammar school if your child passed the test or you're intending to appeal for a place at that selective school in March. As I said, you can still list a grammar school if they didn't pass. I've said this several times, I'm just trying to drum it in. If your child failed the test, they will not be offered a place at a selective school on your list automatically. They will be offered a place at a non-selective school, which appeared highest on that list, but that doesn't stop you appealing later, all right? It just means that in March, when you're offered a place at that non-selective school, you can. I would recommend you still accept that place, because if you refuse it, and you don't succeed in the appeal, your child might not have a list at all, a school at all. All right. So because you have to accept that place before the appeals happen, I recommend you accept the place offered, whichever school it is, and then appeal accordingly, which might be to a non-selective school which is closer to you. And higher up your list, or it might be at a selective school that you'd like as well. But certainly accept the place, don't refuse it. The other thing I recommend for the form is please fill out the form properly. Name up to 6 schools, naming each school once. If you intend to appeal after March, you must name the specific grammar or selective school you intend to appeal to. The online form is usually to be submitted by 4 p.m. on the 31st of October. Paper forms are only available from Medway Council, and you need to return it to them at Medway Council at Gun Wharf by 4 p.m. But I'd highly recommend you go the online route. You will hear about fair banding tests. Some of the non-selective schools, Brompton Academy, Victory Academy, Strood Academy, all ask pupils applying for a place to take a fair banding test. This is different to the Medway test. And this is a fair banding test. It's not an entrance test to get into the school. All 3 of those schools are required to take a certain proportion of children from the upper ability range, the middle ability range, the low ability range. And in order to do that, anyone applying to those schools takes a fair banding test, which just tells them what academic ability your child is, and then they will take a proportionate number from each band. Okay. Each school will have its own test, but there is no pass or fail, and children do not get the results. It's purely for the schools to gauge ability and to ensure they're offering places to pupils from across the ability range. However, a child must sit the test at the school if they wish to apply for a place. They're usually scheduled for September, October, so a similar time to the Medway test, but you will need to access application forms via the relevant school websites for the fair banding test before July. Each school is slightly different. So if you know you're going to put, in September, you know you're going to put Brompton Academy, Victory Academy or Strood Academy on the form, before the summer, get onto those websites and check or contact the school and check what you need to do to get your child registered for the fair banding tests for those schools. So if you're intending to apply for any of those 3 schools, make sure you contact them and find out how to register your child for the fair banding test by July. or before July, I recommend, so by the end of June. Okay, that's the process again. The tests. Let's talk about the actual Medway test if you've chosen your child to take them. Same providers last year, a company called CEM. There are maths and verbal reasoning tests. Both of those are modular tests, a series of tests, 6 to 8 short tests, one after the other, ranging between 6 and 15 minutes. And then there's a writing task, 50 minutes, 10 minutes to read the prompt and plan, and 40 minutes to actually write. Okay, so you've got a math test on one day, verbal reasoning. I think actually might be the same day as the math test, and the writing task is on a separate day. Okay, so 3 tests in all. The testing procedure, the overall score is then calculated from the standardized scores, what we call the standardized scores, with the following formula. So they'll get a standardized writing score. As I said, a standardized score means it's pitched around 100. So if after they've added up all the scores and worked out all their magic maths according to the age of the child, then they will get a score pitched around about 100. If the standardized score is 100, then that means they're bang on average for their age. If it's over 110, then they're obviously showing more able ability. If it's less than 100, then they're below the age expected for their age, the standard expected for their age. Okay, so that's standardized score. However, they do a bit more maths with that. They take the standardized writing score and they double it, and they add it to the standardized math score, which they also double, and they add it to a single standardized verbal reasoning score. Okay, so there'll be a score for your writing, which will be pitched around 100, above or below or on, and that'll be doubled, and then the same for the standardized math scores, and then one of your VR scores, and then they add them all together. So for example, if a child scored 100 in the writing, 105 in the maths, and 110 in the verbal reasoning, it'll be 2 times 100, 2 times 105, plus 110, and that'll give them a score of 520. Okay, the pass mark varies each year. They simply take the highest grade and then draw a line after the top 22% of pupils, and wherever the lowest grade is for those pupils, that's the pass mark. So in the past, it's been as high as 540 as a pass mark, and in other years, it's been as low as 480. All right, so it all depends, and that's where they draw the line. As the selection is supposed to identify the top 25% of the entire Year 6 cohort across Medway for selection, that leaves 3% of places available for review and appeals, so the mop-up, if you like. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. The maths paper, as I said, is a series of modular tests within the the hour and a half or so when we do it, and so there's 8 or so tests, and they vary between 8 and 13 minutes, so short and sharp. But the children obviously need to do each test independently. The test will be about the 4 operations, so addition, subtraction, multiplication. There's usually it'll test their understanding of fractions, decimals, percentages, and equivalences between the 3 of them, coordinates on the 4 quadrants, angles, algebra and equations do come into it, volume, area, time, money, ratio, handling data, being able to read and interpret a range of graphs, including pie charts, and reading scales. All of those come into it. The writing paper is a written task. It's either fiction or non-fiction. It depends on the year. They are looking for imagination and flair in whatever the children write. They are looking for writing that is varied and interesting and conveying meaning in a range of forms for different readers. So knowing your audience effectively. Vocabulary choices are imaginative and words are used precisely. They're looking for a range of simple and complex sentences that are organised into well-organised paragraphs, and a range of punctuation, including commas, apostrophes, inverted commas, and that is used accurately. We don't teach writing like that in schools. We don't. We spend weeks working over, exploring text, looking at different ways it might be put together, and then generating our own text and writing them and improving them and going back and then eventually presenting. So we make sure that over the term 6 in year 5, we will be setting cold planning and writing tasks, so they're not rocking up to the test, not having experienced this before. So we will be sending those home for you to look at as well. But it's a chance for children to actually plan a task in 10 minutes and spend 40 minutes writing it. So we will be giving them that practice over term 5, so they are term 6, sorry, so they are prepared for it. The verbal reasoning paper. These are logical reasoning problems, and they're very vocabulary based. So the better your child is, the better they will do on this, and the better vocabulary, breadth of vocabulary they've got, the better they will do. So here's an example. And the thing is that they're all variations on a theme, these questions. So we do practice verbal reasoning type questions. So they get used to the type of questions they're likely to get because they're the same kind of things they get asked. So for example, here's one. One letter from the word on the left-hand side must be taken and placed into or added to the word on the right-hand side so that two new and proper words are formed which are correctly spelt. So take one letter from the word on the left and add it into the word on the right to make two new words. So if you think about it, learn and cat, if we take one letter from learn and add it to cat, what can we get? Well, we will get lean and we will get cart. Okay, so that's a typical kind of vocabulary one as well. Another example, there are two groups of words in each question below. Choose two words, one from each group, which are closest in meaning to each other. So again, there's quite a few nuances in here which you need to be careful of. So often, numerous, great, big, many, seldom. So which of those two actually click together? Well, you're looking at many and numerous are the two closest in meaning. So they're the ones that you would actually circle or underline. So as I said, supporting your child in school. In year 5, pupils will have been provided with verbal reasoning practice. That doesn't really help them in terms of, you know, their breadth of vocabulary. It does give them practice the kind of questions they like to get. So I would recommend the more reading they can do, the better, and the more challenging text they can read, the better. As long as they've got that breadth of vocabulary, that will help. Homework obviously is set, particularly in maths, with those kind of topics which we don't do so much of in year 5. For example, algebra tends to happen more in year 6. Well, that's a bit past the event for the Medway test, isn't it? So we do make sure we're covering algebra in year 5 as well, so children aren't going into the Medway test without having an experience of it. The weekly cold planning and writing tasks, we call them cold because they go into it cold. So you have a task to plan and then write without any preparation. So we do give them that weekly practice. And as I said, covering certain maths concepts in class. At home, you can help by supporting with homework, because obviously that's all going to help. If you wish to use revision books, look for the ones that have CEM on the front, because they're the kinds of tests. There are other providers who produced 11+ type tests for other counties, but CEM are the ones who do the Medway test. So use the ones that have CEM indicated books on the front. Okay, and because there'll be similar types of tasks, particularly in the maths and the verbal reasoning with those modular little tasks. However, don't put unreasonable pressure on them, on your children. So, you know, don't overkill the revision and the tutors. Don't promise laptops, cars, exotic holidays, etc. It just puts too much pressure on them, and you know, if they don't pass, then obviously they're going to be in a position where they think they've let everybody down. Right, the review process, a bit more information on this. This is the one that's immediately after the test if they didn't pass. And as I said, it's an academic review within 2 weeks of the test results, and it's purely based on the pupils' works in books. The process is designed to identify pupils, spelling error there, sorry, who are clear grammar ability, who may not have performed well on the test day. There are 2% of places available to be filled by the review process. The independent review panel is made up of head teachers. They look at identified work samples from the pupils' current year 6 books and those from terms 5 and 6 of year 5. So they get all the books, but we have to identify 3 or 4 examples in each book, but they will look at the rest of the book as well. They are looking for work that is clearly of a grammar school standard, i.e. greater depth. Presentation, the quality, quantity of the work, the investigations in the maths, the investigations in the science, that greater depth of thinking, the quality of writing. And again, it's completely cold. They just look through the books. Nobody is there to talk through the books. It's done completely on the work in the books. As a school, we will advise parents if we think we can support a review application by discussing the quality of the work and other indicators. Also, the child's feelings and opinions, i.e. what's in the best interest of the child, and possible guidance on completing the form. There is a form you can actually send off with the review, which basically says why you think your child should be considered for review and perhaps why they didn't perform well enough on the day, but it's not a great deal you can actually offer there. It's fairly matter of fact. Most of the evidence is based on the books that they see in front of them. Choosing schools, read the information online. The government, the Medway test, Medway admissions, school admissions website has information on every single secondary school in Medway. Visit the school on their open days. They'll all have open days in the autumn term before the end of the deadline for getting the forms done. If you can do a visit during the day when the children are there, that's better, because quite often the schools will have an all singing, all dancing visit after school where, you know, the children who are there are the ones who are presenting about the school, but it's actually great to actually see the school in action during the course of a school day with all the children, because then you get a real feel for it. But that may not be possible, depends what the school's offering. And find out what your child thinks. Make sure your child is going to each school and getting a sense of it, because you'll be surprised. Sometimes I've heard children who are potentially grammar school material saying quite clearly, actually, I don't want to go here. I'd actually prefer to go to the non-selective school which I've visited. And you do need to hear what your child is thinking. It needs to be a discussion between all of you. Look carefully at the oversubscription criteria. So if the school fills up quickly, what is the oversubscription criteria for the waiting list, if you like? It's pretty similar in all schools, but it's explained in full online at the Medway admission site. So each school will present what their oversubscription criteria is, whether it's based on siblings, test scores, or whether it's based on how close you live, etc. One thing I haven't actually put on the presentation, but I'll explain again, is the appeals process. That happens at the end of the year after you've been offered a place in March. You need to accept the place, whichever place you're offered, I would suggest, because otherwise you could be left without any school at all. But then you can appeal to as many schools as you like. So as long as there's a selective school on the list, you can apply for a grammar school, as long as it's on your original list. And you can apply for other non-selective schools that are nearby or perhaps further up the list that you didn't get. And that's done directly to the school. Again, they will publish their appeals processes, and you appeal to the school, and we will supply a letter of support for that as well. But as I said, I recommend you do accept the school you were originally given on the 1st of March, because you may not be successful in the appeals, and if you're not, and you didn't accept that place, then I'm afraid they'll just give you any old school that there's a spare place at. So do make sure you accept that place in March before doing any appeals. Okay, so I hope that was useful. Any questions, because I realise that's a lot of information, please, you've got this presentation available on our website, so go back and look through it again and read through all the slides. If you have any questions, please email me via the office, and I'll be able to advise accordingly. And of course, meet with your class teacher or have a conversation with your class teacher about whether you should or should not, or in their opinion, they'll be able to give you some guidance of whether they think that your child should be registered for the test or not. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. And thank you very much for listening.